Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, Jacqueline from JP Mint, and Greg the Single Guy, bringing you episodes from around the world about the best kept secret in education. You got it, international teaching. Welcome to the show. All right, everybody, this is Greg the Single Guy. Kent is somewhere in the Seattle area. I think he's just playing right now because he's not with us. And today I am alone with our guest. She's coming to us from Baltimore currently. And I want you to say hello to Amaris. Amaris, welcome to the show.
Hello. My name is pronounced Amaris, by the way. I know a lot of people make that mistake, but it's okay.
Oh, okay. Like loving. Almost.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, Amaris. Okay. I love that. Oh, no pun intended. That's great. So you're coming to us from Baltimore, and you heard us from another show. I believe it was Making the Grade, one of our other podcast groups that we love. And what brings you to our show today? We're going to talk a little bit about international. In fact, let's do this. Let's have you give us a little elevator version of what brought you along and where you are on your journey now.
Yeah. So what I want to talk about, I guess what I want to dive more deeply into is what it's like being a minority and a woman who is a minority and teaching overseas, teaching internationally, what that looked like for me. I can't speak for everybody, but what that looked like for me in different countries and how it impacted my journey and where I've landed today. Yeah.
So you're a certified teacher in the States before you went overseas?
I was certified here, right? Like in the States. But I got started in Korea. My first job was teaching in South Korea, which is crazy. Yeah. And I was like, not gonna go. And I was so against it. And I was like, this is not the trajectory. Like, I'm not supposed to do this. This is not how I'm supposed to start my teaching career. But they wanted me. Like, they were like, come in 2 weeks. Like, you need to come over here, full package, everything, paying, the whole rundown, paying for housing, and we'll set you up and X, Y, and Z. And my mother was like, whatever you're staying here for, we'll be here when you come back. So that was my whole.
Took a leap right off the deep end.
Literally, like student teaching, Korea. Like,
did you just come across it on the internet, or did someone tell you about it and you sort of got into it that way? How did that happen with Korea?
Yeah, somebody told me about. So I'm a part of a sorority, and one of my line sisters was like, I guess she had stumbled upon it because back when I was doing it, this was like 2010. I feel like it was in its early stages, and so, well, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. That's when I stumbled upon international teaching. All you needed was a bachelor's in anything, literally anything. But luckily, I had my bachelor's in education. And then, obviously also to be a native English speaker. But she got it, or she looked at it, and she didn't decide to go. And then she was like, listen, anybody else, like, this is an opportunity. I'm not going, but if y'all want to go, this is something to do. And I was like I'm saying, at first I was like, no, this is not for me, even though, I'm an educator and I just went through this whole program and got my degree and became certified. No, this is not for me. I'm supposed to stay here. I had like a new boyfriend, in college, whatever. Like, you think you're going to get married.
And your friend is like, let's see if Amaris will do it. Let's see if Amaris will do it. I'm not doing it. Let's see if she's brave.
Exactly. Like, no, not me, but you.
Sucker.
So, I mean, yeah, that's how it all started. And I was anti-going, but thank God I went because it turned out great. I love it.
So what did you teach there then? Did you teach homeroom? Did you teach specialist? What was it?
I taught kindergarten when I went to Korea. So, and then it was kindergarten. Obviously, I was an ESOL teacher, but I wasn't certified as an ESOL teacher. You know how it goes overseas. It's like, again, if you have
we're all ESOL. Yeah.
We're all ESOL. Exactly. So, but they wanted it as a typical, like, homeroom type of, like, general ed sort of feel, right? So they
absolutely. Had kindergarten teacher, you're from the States, you speak the English, your kids are going to be Korean, or they're going to be some other. Yep. Okay.
Yep. So, and they were all Korean. They were all native Korean speakers, which was crazy because when I went into it, I was like, but I'm not, that was one of my sort of hesitations, like, but I'm not certified in ESOL. I don't know how to teach a child to acquire a second language. And I thought like, oh my God, that's going to be like a huge hurdle for me. But it turned out that it helped me because I'm early childhood certified. And so it was like heavy phonics, phonemic awareness, like all the things that I had learned in my undergrad came into like I had to use them. I didn't have a choice.
I don't know about you, but a lot of people have the misconception that if they're going to go overseas and teach, they have to like learn another language. They're going to have a special certification for ESOL, you know, teaching English to speakers of other languages, or an ESL minor degree. But what they're really looking for in most cases, unless it's a special speech therapy or something, is they're looking for a kindergarten teacher from the States. And that's what they're looking for. Like anybody that teaches kindergarten in the States right now could sign up and go do really well overseas, right? Exactly. My kindergarten cohort, you know, my kindergarten teachers in my building, they are men and women that just teach kindergarten, and they don't speak like other languages. They don't speak Arabic, you know, here in the Middle East, they just speak English. And I think you found that out once you got there, right? It's sort of like that level of that expectation was taken off your shoulders. You could sort of sit back and you could just deal with what it's like to be a first year teacher, I guess.
Exactly.
Wow. And that was your first year or no teaching?
That was my first year. That was my first year teaching.
I did the same thing overseas in Honduras. I taught my first year, and 20 some years ago, I still remember the first day. Do you remember your first day?
Yeah. Well, yes. And I remember, thank God, I had this amazing co-teacher who was really like what we would think of as like a para educator in the States, who spoke Korean. And so it took away a lot of my nerves. I mean, but like you're saying, the whole point is not for you to speak the language of the children or like, you know, whatever is happening in the classroom, the native language. The point is you speak English. And so you're trying to get them to acquire the language, not, you know, throwing away their native tongue, but like, also, you can learn English, you know, like as this nice little companion to whatever your native tongue is.
Exactly.
So,
well, that's wonderful. And how long did you stay in Korea then?
I was there for almost 2 years and I loved it. It was amazing.
Good for you. What a great experience. Because I did the same kind of thing, and I stayed overseas. I don't know, we'll get into a little bit more after Korea, but I think that first year as a teacher, that I'm taking out that book by Harry Wong and his wife, they, you know, the first days of school, I'm borrowing from other teachers. I didn't know what to take with me. Back then in 2001, there wasn't a whole lot of communication with internet. It was more like just starting. And what do you take with you your first year of school? I'm packing my favorite books and everything. I must have had like 200 pounds of just books. So you can relate to all that. That's great that you 100%. Did that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 2 years in Korea.
Yep. But it was a lot of piecing it together. They had a curriculum over there. It was a Canadian school. So they had, you know, what they wanted us to implement. But then they were like, and just sprinkle in some centers too. So I had to figure that. There were pieces that I was figuring out. But again, it's your first year teaching, one, where you're already sort of like a deer in headlights. And then two, you're in a different country. And then three, like, you know, you're figuring it out. All teachers are figuring. I still don't have it figured out. This is year 14. I don't have it figured out.
After Korea, did you go back home or somewhere else?
Yeah. So after Korea, I went to North Carolina, which is not home. But I said, let me go back to the States. In my mind, that was my version of being an adult. And I was like, I'm going to be like a teacher, you know, in the States, stay here and be like somewhere stable. And I taught third grade that year.
What's it like being an adult?
Right.
I still haven't figured that out.
I know. I didn't figure it out that year either. Have I figured it out now? No.
Right.
Yeah.
So third grade in North Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah. Third grade in North Carolina in so it was vastly different. You know, in Korea, I was at a private school where parents obviously were paying money to have their children learn English. And I was teaching literally like all day. It went from like 10 in the morning till like 7 at night. So we just taught, like, kept going. And in the evening, there was like another cohort of kids who would come in, and that was more like language development focused. But yeah, so to go from that to now being in the States where I am Gen Ed, no, I mean, I had a couple, I think maybe 2 or 3 ESOL students in my classroom, but it just felt like this is not where I'm supposed to be. This is not life. There's no sort of like excitement. And that's where I learned, like, I love to travel. I love to see new places and new things.
Where'd you go after North Carolina then?
After North Carolina, I went to Egypt. Yeah, that's where I landed. Yeah.
And I taught in Egypt also, not at the same school you did. I taught at the American School of Egypt, which was,
Okay.
for me, it was a terrible year, but that's another story. It wasn't the right fit for me. But you taught at, can you say it on the air? I don't know if you can say it on the air.
I mean, I guess I can. Cairo American College. Yeah, I guess. I guess.
So shout out to Dolly if she's still there. We have a mutual friend, Dolly, and hopefully she's still there. I don't know. I haven't talked to her in a long time. How long did you spend in Cairo then?
So I was in Cairo for 4 years. And that was where a lot of changes happened. I met my husband, but more importantly, I think if we're headed into sort of the minority and the intersection of everything that I identify with, right? That's where I noticed like my differences, like even growing up, like I grew up in New York, literally a melting pot.
Yep.
In my school, in my neighborhood.
Yep. All different colors, so I never felt cultures. Yeah.
Exactly. I never felt like I'm different in any way per se. And if I am different, that's great because I have a culture that is celebrated. But when I went to Egypt, it was very much, even in Korea too. But I think Korea had gotten sort of used to seeing minorities because they had an army base there and they saw all different types of people. But they would heckle me a little bit, like I would be walking down the street trying to be modestly dressed, but still there would be heckling. There would be, are you African? And then I would have to explain to them like, yes, my ancestors are from Africa, but I identify as an American, and they sort of, people who I spoke to, people on the street, not people who I worked with, didn't necessarily understand that concept, right? Like they were like, no, you're African, and I would say to them like, no, I mean, I guess you're more African than me. Like you live on the
you're in Cairo, you're in Africa, you're African, buddy. Don't heckle me.
Right. So, and then, there was like just a negative stigma around being being perceived as a dark-skinned African person, right? Because,
right.
And later, some of my friends told me like a lot of, I don't know what to call, I guess prostitutes, I'm going to call it what it is, would come and work there. Like that would be sort of, that's from like the regular
countries, right?
Yeah, okay. From other countries, so like from Sudan and things like that. So maybe that's where that was coming from, but still, like you don't know. And then I remember one time distinctly, somebody was leaning out of a car. I'm walking home. They're leaning out of a car saying "Yasamada," which means like chocolate, but in a negative way. It has like a negative connotation. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Stop!" And they were like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry," because they heard me speak some English. Like it sounded like I was a native English speaker. They're like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry, I didn't know." And I'm like, why does that matter? Like, why, whether I'm American, African, whatever I am, is it okay then to like harass somebody? Like,
and I think, part of it, it's a little bit complicated to know the reason exactly why, but you're also fitting into that category as a woman in Cairo, right? And being a woman in some Middle Eastern countries, well, heck, anywhere around the world, even sometimes being a woman is much different than being a man traveling. When I was around Cairo, I was there for a year and I did quite a bit of traveling around Egypt, but it's much different being a man or being a woman that has a man walking with her or attending her. Attending is a bad word. More like that's what they think, right? Attending. Here's a man with you, even just walking along with you together, so to speak, and they will not necessarily treat you the same way. They're still going to get catcalls, right? But it's a little bit more, it's a little bit less of a harassment when you're with somebody and you're talking with them and you're traveling with them, walking with them, etc. Even on the bus.
That is 100% true. Because when I met my husband and we would begin to, walk around together, go out to eat together, none of it. And it was Madame this, Madame that. And then when I had my kid, I had 2 of my kids over there. I have 4 kids now, but the oldest 2 were born there. And if I had my kids with me, it would be the same thing, Madame, the utmost respect. But if it's just me by myself, which it was in the beginning, it was a completely different experience, which is messed up, to say the least, for lack of a better term.
And it's very complicated, right?
Yeah.
I can't speak for either the minority or being female. And it's just, I'm not in any of the underrepresented category. A couple weeks ago, we had an episode with the Diversity Collective. And part of what Alan and Aparna are doing is they are trying to get more leadership in schools to be diversified, to shout out and say, hey, there's like less than 1% that are women or much less women of color or any of the underrepresented minorities that are in the leadership of the schools, which is exciting, right? So they're trying to change some of these things that we're going to be talking about, because I would imagine when you were in Korea, I would imagine that when you're in Cairo at those international schools, even in those two countries, you would see very few women compared to men. And also, if you do see women compared to men, they may not even be minority women, right?
Right.
So you're checking off the boxes, a lot of like check marks against you compared to the majority that you'll see in schools. I've been to 7 different schools overseas, and I've seen that it's a lot of like Caucasian male directors. There's very few. There's very few men, even in lower elementary. It's mostly women. That's where you do run into women, which is strange, right?
Yep.
But you're not going to see them in the upper levels as much. So we have a huge discussion ahead of us, and you're living it, right? And you've lived through a lot of it. You're living it now, and I love to have your point of view on this, because I've heard it from other sources and other people's experiences. But knowing that you've been both overseas, then back to the U.S., and then overseas again, and now you're back in the States, you're jumped around quite a bit, and you're a mom of 4. Wow.
Yeah.
So, man, I tell you, what was Korea like? I know, let's go back to Korea a little bit. Were there other women teaching with you?
Yeah. So funny enough, again, like I said, in Korea, there was that. It exists, right? Like there are people who have biases that they don't even recognize that they have, right? So I came into a situation where there were, like I said, the co-teachers were Korean, but then the main teachers, I guess, were American or Canadian. And so I was the only, which I find myself in this position a lot, the only African American female there for majority of my time. I think the last 6 months, another African American woman came in. So another experience that happened while I was there. So when she came in, right, I had been the only African American woman there for a year and a half. And she came and she started teaching, and we were eating lunch one day with the other teachers. And one of the ladies was like, does it feel weird now? Like, do you feel in competition, that you're in competition with
Competition?
I'm going to say her name. But I'm like, what kind of, I guess she thought she was like making a joke, but I'm like, that's, what is that to say to somebody, right? Like there can only be one of you who is good. And so now do you feel like you're in competition for that spot? Essentially that's what she was saying. And again, she probably felt that it was a joke and that we were close enough for her to make it, but it's an offense that I just feel like it just shows your lack of like awareness of
Definitely
the world, right? like diversity and like all of these different nuances. But I didn't expect her necessarily to have that perspective because she was a white female, so it is.
Maybe she was oblivious of what she was actually saying. Possible. I don't know. There's no excuse for it. I mean, she's probably dropping us into the us and them, or us and you all. That's ridiculous. There's just not enough African Americans out in these schools. I have met so many great teachers that are African American descent, that are of other minorities. And I just love it when I come into a school and there's already some there. And in leadership, I have an assistant principal right now that's African American, woman, mother, right, of 2 beautiful kids in our school. And I think that just fosters, and hopefully it'll foster more and more recruiting of people that are of color, right? I love that. Wow. But no, that's crazy that she said that to you. I mean, did you go storm off at just like sit somewhere like you go sit
Yeah.
over there, young lady?
Yeah. You know, when you find yourself in situations like those, like in the moment, it's like you're sort of paralyzed. Like you don't know what to say. You have to develop that. Exactly. You internalize it. And then the next time you sort of develop that language for, if I find myself in a similar situation, what should I say? What should my actions be? And not to like argue with anybody, but just to let them know, like, look, that's not okay. Even for them, like it's an experience for them to like take and learn from. And the next time they're in contact or in a similar situation with minorities or, whoever, some othered group, right? Some marginalized community, they won't say something that's as ignorant as that.
Well, I'm sure that you would be tired. You wouldn't be able to even teach during the day. You'd be so tired of trying to correct other people that are treating you without even consciously doing it, right? Without intent. Like if I did that to you, if I said something to you that was not intentional, it was just sounded ignorant, or it could be taken offensive if you thought I really meant it. But you're not going to be able to correct every person that says something to you every day. You're going to internalize it, right?
And that's the issue too. Yeah, that's the issue. So the issue is like, I was like a friend of this person who said that, right? So again, I can understand why in her mind, she's like, okay, this is fine to say, like, oh, it's a joke. But yeah, it just wasn't. And like I said, there was something that had to happen inside of me before I would be able to, I guess, speak to that. And that's sort of been my journey through education. Honestly, like I said, I found myself that was the first situation where I've been the only African American, but it definitely wasn't the last situation. So
and it won't be the last.
Again, I've learned how to navigate.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
I was going to say it's going to happen more. It's going to keep happening, right? We just don't have enough women in international schools. We don't have enough women of color in international schools. We don't have a lot. That's why you're underrepresented. And we're going to try and change that through discussion, especially, right? And hopefully that friend of yours is going to think back and go, oh my God, was that me? She's going to be listening to our show and she's going to be like, oh my God. She's going to call you up and she's going to apologize. You're going to be like, listen, it's okay. It's okay. Notice I still your friend and I still sat next to you at lunch. But I just didn't answer you.
Right.
I just glared at you for a heartbeat. Exactly. Oh, I'm sorry to laugh. It's not a laughing matter. I like humor at the end of it a little bit. So
it's in the past.
Well, I don't envy you in any way for that. And I don't live that. I'm learning through discussion. And if I offend you, even on this show, just let you blurt it out and just say, listeners, he did it. Listen what he said.
No. Everybody listen. The most exciting episode.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we're going to fight right now? No, I don't want to fight right now. All right, let's take a moment for a little commercial about how to get in touch with us. You can, of course, find all four of us at the itpexpat.com. That's www.itpexpat.com.
Or you could also find us at email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Or if you're into Facebook, we have a new Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/ITPexpat, where you can find all kinds of inside information about ITP Expat.
You can also find us on Instagram at ITP Expats. That's with an S. ITP Expats is our handle.
All right. And thank you, listeners. We have over 100 countries represented by our listeners. And though we're not monetized, we are here for you. And we would like to thank all of you for listening. So let's get back to the show. All right. So North Carolina and Korea are in the past now. And you went on to Cairo. You got a lot of harassment just outside of school because you're a woman probably. And also, I know you're a woman. I probably harassed because you're a woman. also of color, and they were confused about where you're from, and you can't just sit there and explain that to everybody, right?
Right.
Oh man, wish I could see the look on their faces when you just start blurting out English at them.
I know. They're like, wait, what? Yeah.
Let's talk about some educational theory here, Muhammad. Okay,
Right.
let's do it right now.
Exactly.
Come here, Ahmed. I'll tell you about some
Right.
educational stuff. You come sit in my kindergarten, right?
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
There you
I
go.
love kindergarten. Did you teach kindergarten in Cairo also? Or did you
Yeah.
teach
So
something?
I taught kindergarten at Cairo English School. And then I taught pre-K, what would be considered pre-K in the States,
Got it.
in Cairo English School. They call it Foundational Stage 1 or something like that. But yeah, it was fun. CAC was, like how you said you had a bad experience. It was a bad fit. CAC was a bad fit for me. Dolly
Yeah.
was cool. Shout out to
Right.
Dolly again. And there were some like cool staff members, but I think me coming in, again, I was still a young teacher. I think that was my third year at that point, second or I don't know. But I was a young teacher. And again, another thing, I have so many stories, Jesus.
I love stories.
I got off the plane, landed in Cairo, again, wearing my most modest, in my mind, dress. Like it's long and flowy and, nothing's showing, whatever. I get into the, whatever it is, the thing that they're using, the little truck or whatever, to transport us from point A to point B, from airport to housing. And the principal is there. She greets me, right? She like gets me on, whatever. As we're riding, she says, CAC is a very prestigious school. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
what does
I know
that infer? I mean,
what are you inferring? And so I guess she went on to say whatever she said, but I took it and I internalized it as be on your P's and Q's, Black girl. You know what I mean? Like, get it together, Black girl. First of all, why would you hire me if you think that I'm not going to be a professional? Second of all, like, what makes you think, like, just by looking at me and having maybe a 5-minute conversation, that I'm not going to be
what's the opposite of prestigious anyway?
School?
Yeah, what's the
like,
opposite of I would have looked there and said, hey, I'm usually non-prestigious or anti-prestigious, but for you, since you mentioned it so nicely, I'll be prestigious for you.
I'm like, what?
Seriously.
Where did that comment even come from? So that sort of set us off on a bad
with the relationship
trajectory
with that person. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just not great. It wasn't great from the get-go. And then it was, again, I'm a young teacher. They had a curriculum, but it wasn't like a strong curriculum. I don't know how much you know about like what's going on with Lucy Calkins now, like how they're like, whatever she was telling us to do was all wrong, right?
Gag me with a pitchfork. I mean, I don't want to hear about
and that's
Lucy
what they were
Calkins.
using. And I knew it was wrong when I was using it. I'm using it. I'm like, this is not good for kids. Like, this is not best in my mind. But I'm like, okay, I'm a young teacher. Maybe they know better than me, like whatever. And I was using it, but it wasn't great. So that was another point of contention. It was just a lot. Then I got pregnant.
Lucy Calkins has a lot of a learning curve, according to one of the principals that hired me, assistant principal. And it was a little bit of contention with me too, because I said, do you want, and this is a little bit about me. When I got hired on, even at this school, the assistant principal in one interview, and it was not anybody but him. And the principal said during the interview, he's like, well, I don't know if you're going to be strong enough to teach Lucy Calkins if you haven't done it before. And I said, you want a teacher that's a great teacher, or do you want a teacher that knows Lucy Calkins, right?
Right.
And it sort of got him thinking of stuff, because when you get to these schools, some of these international schools have set curriculum that we have to adapt to. And as a teacher, you land in a school and you'd say, okay, I'm going to learn that curriculum where I have experience with it. On the other hand, some schools are going to have no curriculum. I mean, like, you're redrawing everything. You are from the ground up. They're like, we threw away that one. We've been using it for years, but we decided not to this year. And teachers want a little freedom. But that's also another extreme. And it's tough. It's a different flavor at every school. And I'm sorry you had to do the deal with the Lucy Calkins after the prestigious woman talked to you.
I know.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
Yeah.
You said then you got pregnant.
Then I got pregnant. So there was so many things that happened. So I got pregnant. This is in Egypt. Now, again, very taboo. I'm in the Middle East. I'm in Egypt. I meet my husband, who was not my husband at the time. I got pregnant out of wedlock. And so that again was like, oh my God, pregnancy out of wedlock, like the end of the world. And nobody said it, right? Nobody said like, oh, this is bad. But there was like this feel of like, you did something wrong. And so I kind of got a slap on the wrist. I got pregnant. I went out for maternity leave. And when I came back, I was supposed to go obviously back into my kindergarten classroom as a teacher, right? Like you get a long-term sub, you go back in your classroom. They were like, oh no, you do this little interventionist position that we don't know. Like we haven't fleshed it out yet. You just like figure it out.
They changed your position for when you came back.
For when I came back, they changed my position. Then I was told I was lucky to still have a job. So there was that. And so it's like being penalized for having a child, which is ridiculous. But, you know, it just wasn't a great fit. And I saw it from the jump, but I just didn't heed whatever like warnings were coming from the universe. I just kept pushing through.
Oh my gosh. And did you got out of that school, went to another one in Egypt, or did you? Yeah, you did. Okay. And the second school in Egypt that you were at, was it a better fit for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the other school, again, it was a British run school, British curriculum. And just everybody there was very like warm and welcoming and like understanding of the fact that like, I mean, I wasn't a new teacher at that point. I sort of like had found my voice and would speak and say what it was, but just the staff, the communication, the ability to like legitimately plan as a team. At the second school, there were, I think, 8 teachers that were pre-K teachers. And we legitimately would like map out our week and like be on the same page. Whereas I feel like at the other school, the initial school, it was like there were 3 of us and we would kind of sort of plan, but it was like, I'm doing this. What are you doing? Oh, I'm doing that. Oh, you should do that. Like, it wasn't like a cohesive, if I send my kid to this class or this class, they're getting the same thing, you know? That, again, was another point of contention because I guess it was looked at as like, oh, well, you're the teacher who's not doing what everybody else is doing, but I don't know what everybody else is doing because they're literally just giving me pieces of their day. But anyway, the second school was more collaborative. I felt like we did lots of activities that, even though the second school was more Egyptian students, we had like International Day, which for me was like, oh, this is great. You know, like we're celebrating all these different Arabic countries and Arabic speakers. And then they had the American booth and the British booth. It was just a lot more inclusive.
So it's more of a fit for you. And part of that was part of it you're saying is that the student body was different because you have the host national type school, which it may be a British school, but it's a host national student body, meaning mainly Egyptians. And the school I was at was very similar. It was an American school run by somebody from Middle East, or I don't know where he was from, Lebanese maybe, but he ran the school and it was all Egyptian people and all Egyptian students, and they ran the school at the time, my experience, right? And then, of course, CAC is a very international student body as well as staff, right? So there's a big difference. And that's a good point that you've made, a differentiation between schools. And the thing is, we don't always know what questions to ask before we get hired, like what kind of student body you have. But I tell everybody listening to this, please, in your interviews, find out what kind of student body as well as what kind of a staff you have, right? And I feel like I'm going to start asking about staff, not what kind of passport they hold, but I think as a result of talking more and more about diversity and the fact that I enjoy the diverse staff and the diverse student body so much. In the past, one of my questions has always been about student body, like what is it, a host national, or is it a mixture of all different countries? When I get that answer, I'm usually comfortable and I figure I could deal with any kind of staff. But on the other hand, I've changed as I've gotten older. I want to say more and more, I want to ask, what kind of diversity does your staff have and your leadership have? And I think that's something I'm hoping that our audience will start thinking about more in interviews, because we want to be, at least I want to be, in a staff that is much more diverse than I've seen in a long time, right?
Yeah. I mean, so here's the thing too. Like, one, if you don't have diversity at the table, you're missing somebody's perspective, period. Like,
Totally.
you're just not getting it, like there could be something that you are like completely blind to, but it's because you're not a part of that group. So you need it. Like, it's not like an option in my mind. Like, you have to have multiple perspectives to come to conclusions that like make sense for the majority of your student body and your community as a whole, honestly. And the world is not one color. So that again is like, it's putting your student body honestly at a disadvantage, because if all you see is one type of person for your entire life, you have no idea how to be around anybody else. So you're putting them at an automatic disadvantage. So multiple perspectives are key, I think, in any sort of decision-making table, period.
Exactly. As staff, it's very important to have opportunities to see other kind of diverse opinions, diverse lifestyles, diverse cultures. But think of the little kids. Think of the little African American or just African, the darker
Mm-hmm.
skinned kids, and they
Yep.
say, "Oh my gosh, she looks just like me. Look at her skin is a little bit lighter than mine, or hers is darker than mine." Right?
Yeah.
I can just see some kids just going up to you and just like immediately saying, "Wow, a teacher, a woman, not just
Yep.
some man, some white man teaching me," because it
Yeah.
happens a lot, right? And
Yeah.
I've had that discussion
I
with a
think, and
couple of
that's
my
the whole
friends.
reason.
Go ahead.
That's the whole reason I became a teacher. When I was in kindergarten, I had a teacher who looked just like me. She was dark skinned. She was beautiful in my eyes, and she smelled like apple pie. Honestly,
And
like
she changed your life.
I just, yeah, she literally, like, I was like, oh my God, like, she is amazing. Like, I could do that too. It was a question in my mind, because before then I was just like, I can be a doctor, or like in my mind, it's always like these big, huge things or whatever, even though teaching is a huge job. But teaching just never was on my radar. And then I saw her and I was like, oh, I'm doing it.
Good for you. I love that.
Yeah.
But it takes one person, one teacher in your school life. If you have just even one teacher that relates to you more, even
Mm-hmm.
if it's a physical, like it's a physical similarity, it will change.
Right.
It would change hopefully that student's life, and many times it does, right?
Yep. Change or save. Yep.
I remember I just didn't have a lot of women that taught me as a boy growing up 100 years ago, but there weren't a lot of women. They were in the elementary school, yes, but I remember not having men in elementary school. For me, it's sort of a little back asswards, right? The kids are like, "Oh my God, it's
Right.
Mr. Chicken or Mr. Lemoine. Oh my God, it's a man in third grade," as opposed
Yep.
in other schools, especially, right? I'm
Yeah.
lucky enough to work in a staff right now that has both a little bit of diversity, just not enough, even in our leadership. And yet there's a little bit of diversity in elementary with male to female, which is pretty cool. We
Okay.
have some of the best kindergarten. You talk kindergarten. I love teaching kindergarten. And I know some of the greatest teachers I've met are male kindergarten teachers. And
Yep.
that's very important for the little boys growing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Little
Absolutely.
girls, yes, but little girls, they need to have a woman that's teaching them in middle school and high school. In science, imagine
Yep.
that, right?
Yep.
I want to have
Yep.
and professors in college. Let's do it. And what leadership? I want to have a principal that's a woman, that's a black woman or a brown woman, some color other than what I normally see. And if not color,
Absolutely.
culture. That's the
Right.
other thing. The culture transgresses over color sometimes too, right? I wish we could change the world. You and I, let's go change the world right now.
Let's go do it.
I
I'm
think we
down.
are. We're talking
Yeah.
about it. Isn't the communications about as far as I can go with it, and understanding? Try to understand, because I can't live it. I can only
Right.
live on the outside of what you're going through, right? But I can make a better place for you. I can make a better place for you as a woman of color. I can make it better by understanding and transmitting the message.
Right,
Right?
right.
That's what
Yeah,
we need to do.
nobody can see the world from anybody else's eyes, but yeah, as long as you're seeking to understand, I think that is the step in the right direction versus just being oblivious or saying, I don't see color, which you should see color. You should see it and celebrate it and talk about differences in every
Absolutely.
way.
Absolutely. And I love having students of all different colors. And when I sit down with these kids of all different colors and they're asking me with the crayons and they're saying, I want one that has my skin color and I want one with my skin color. And I'm like, let's get them. They're right over there. There's a whole bunch. If we can't find the one that you choose, let's mix a couple of colors together to get as close as we can. I love that, especially kindergarten, third graders. And all of them at the table, different colors if you're lucky enough to teach at an international school with a diversity, right? The host national schools are fun also because you're teaching you were probably teaching the Egyptian kids to be more understanding of diverse cultures because you had to really bring it in for them. That's what my experience was in Egypt. I'm trying to bring them into this idea that there's not just Egyptian boys and girls around them. Right. That was a tough one.
So the school I was at, well, not that there was like so much diversity. It was obviously majority Egyptian students, but then you had sort of an influx of Syrian refugees. So even that was like a different culture for them to understand. It was similar in my eyes as a Black American, but to them, it was a different culture that they had to accept and start to learn and sort of assimilate. Obviously, they spoke the same language, but there were differences apparently within the two cultures. So that was great to have. And then they did have some other British Egyptian students would come there. So they had both sides of that spectrum, like they had lived in, cultures where there was lots of diversity. And then they came and they sort of like got a sense of like who they are and their roots, which I think is beautiful. Anytime you can go back to your ancestry, I think it's a privilege, one, because a lot of, Black Americans have essentially lost that. And so, I think it's beautiful to go back and to see both sides. Yes, I've lived in Britain, but also I see like my mom's culture who speaks Arabic and like prays 5 times a day, like it's beautiful to be immersed in that. So it was good. And the parents though were very they were very I said everybody was collaborative and accepting, but I didn't talk about the parents. They also just sort of took me in and like wanted me to come to all their kids' birthday. But I felt like a little celebrity when I would be around my kids and their parents. So it was nice.
Do you find that you have respect overseas as a teacher rather than in the States?
So 100%, I think overseas, the position is highly regarded. Like when I would tell people that I was a teacher, they would be like, oh my God, a teacher, in Egypt, if I said that, that would be sort of a big thing. Same thing in Korea. Whereas over here, I don't know. I think COVID sort of changed that perspective where people sort of got a glimpse of what teachers actually do and how much time we spend preparing. And for me, it's also about like, yes, I do things with these students inside of school, but my best years as a teacher were the years where I went outside of the classroom and like, oh, you're involved in baseball. Let me go to your baseball game so that you can see that I care about you. And then when you come into the classroom, we've built that relationship. And now like nobody's acting crazy today. You know what I mean? Like, so there's that other side of teaching that I think people don't see. And then, like I said, with COVID, people sort of got a glimpse, parents specifically got a glimpse into the classroom to see like, no, we're putting in work. Like we're not in here just letting kids sort of do whatever it is that you think we're letting them do. We are putting in real work. So the perspective has changed a smidge, but I think it would be more appreciated on the side of the teachers if that was reflected in their pay. So that's a big thing too.
Now you're talking exactly the way I feel about education in the States. And I had this conversation oodles of time. And I say, it's a respect that we need and deserve in the States as a professional. And it needs to be reflected with pay. Mm-hmm. And when a plumber gets more money than a teacher, what's going on with this world, right? Yes. And the amount of education that we go through, we are professionals, right? 100%. Now, going back to you talked a little bit about COVID and about parents getting a little perspective of what it's like to be a teacher. And every time I talk to one of them, I'm like, great, now you figured out what it's like to have 1 out of maybe 40. Right, all at the same time. Yeah, you dealt with your 2 kids. Oh no, that's too bad. And they're 2 different levels of learning, 2 different books. All these 2 different tastes, and this one, that one. Well, even 3 or 4 kids. Well, welcome to the world. If you want to be a teacher, you come in and you can see an entire classroom of differences.
Okay, listen. And so, yeah, even now, like moving into this. So, right now, I'm acting as an instructional coach in the district that I'm in Baltimore. And I'm seeing these young teachers come in and they don't even anticipate the level of work that is going to be. And so, there's this rapid turnover that's happening. Like, I was in a meeting the other day and they were like, the average amount of years that a teacher has in our district is 3 years.
3
So
years.
your average teacher is just 3 years in, which is correct. I mean, it's crazy. It's, I don't know. I don't know what to say for that, but I think a lot of it has to do with like, you did your program and maybe it was kind of light. You maybe did some student teaching, but you didn't anticipate like having to really dig in and do this level of like intervention, honestly, because some are here at this high, very super, like achieving level, like kids were talked to at home. And then you have kids who are like, nobody talked to me when I was little. They just put me in front of this computer and I may or may not have these literacy skills that you're expecting me to come in with. You have kids who are learning English. It's a lot.
What I love about what you're saying too, it's you're coming from the perspective of being in Baltimore, but you're
Right.
also speaking from your experience in Egypt and Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
what it is, the best kept secret in education is that we do as international teachers, it's like you're doing exactly the same general idea of education overseas, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting at right now, I went to school today and I worked on bulletin boards or I worked
Yeah.
on some planning, and that's exactly it. And they're going to have the elementary kids are going to come with their lunchbox in many cases, and they're going to have the lunchbox like you'd buy in the States.
Yeah.
It's going to have the Pokemon on it. I can't believe Pokemon's still a deal thing, right?
Yeah.
Or a SpongeBob SquarePants. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They're going to have a lunchbox, and they're going to be come to school, and then you're going to have the kid brown bag in it, like I always did. You're going to have the kid that has no lunch because mom and dad don't care or didn't find
Mm-hmm.
time to get them, or the nanny was supposed to do it. I think what's amazing, and my message is that, like you were saying, is that there's a lot of similarities between teaching in the States and teaching overseas, right?
Yeah.
Including the idea that women are underrepresented and that women of color are underrepresented, right? Even in the expatriate schools that we have, the international schools, the British or the Canadian, right? I love this conversation. I could talk to you forever. Let's do this. Can you give us a little bit of advice to our listeners, especially those of our listeners that are thinking about going into teaching and thinking about overseas? Could you give us a little advice for those of our listeners that are from minorities, I want to say, underrepresented populations?
So I think the first thing to think about is something that you said, Greg, actually, in that interview. Ask what the makeup of the staff is, the leadership specifically, because those are going to be the people who are making those decisions that will affect you as a teacher. But also, like, ask about the student body makeup if, that's something that is concerning to you. But I think ultimately you need to think about like who you are and what you present as, like what visually are you giving, right? Like, and then think about like how that can show up in different areas. So like me presenting as a dark-skinned African-American female, what are some of the, I don't know, stereotypes or implications of that, right? Like regardless of me being American and being born and raised here and having this background where I've seen and interacted with all different types of people, how will I be perceived? I think is something that you need to sort of sit with and reflect on. And then just show up as your best self, honestly.
I love your attitude. I really do. Are you a website person, a blogger? Is there some way that people get in touch with you, or do they just go through us to get in touch with you? How would you like to present that?
Either way, but I do. Yes, I have a consulting company firm, and we help teachers to feel comfortable supporting ESOL students. So students who are learning English as a second language. I can come in and do some consulting, but I have a Instagram page. So that is the merge_consulting. And then I'm also on, what other platform am I on? Oh, I'm on TikTok. So same thing, the merge_consulting. And yeah, that's how you can find me.
And we'll put those in our notes. Absolutely.
Okay.
I love
Sounds
it.
good.
I've had so much fun talking with you, and I apologize for my my other co-hosts are not here, but it's been a real joy to talk with you. We'll get you on the show at some other point, especially if you go overseas again. I know you have your hands full at home and with the kids and everything, and you've got a position and you've got a consulting company, so that's wonderful. Thank you for your insights. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And we will
Thank you for having
touch with you later. You're welcome very much. So on behalf of the International Teacher Podcast, this is Greg signing off with Amaris and from Baltimore, sharing with